The Galactic Council chamber, once a cathedral of light and argument, sat under a heavy hush that felt like dust settling after an earthquake, and in that hush the human delegation rose to their feet as one, chairs sliding back with a soft, controlled scrape that carried farther than any shout. Dozens of alien eyes, slitted, facete, liquid, luminous, turned toward them, confused at the timing because an emergency session was supposed to last through the next 3 cycles. But the humans did not wait for permission, did not ask for the floor, did not negotiate for attention. They simply stood, 6 guards in quiet suits and 1 woman in a dark ambassador's coat. Lena Reed, her face calm, her shoulders steady, her gaze fixed on the great ring of delegates as if she could see past them to the long cold of the stars. And when the High Speaker tried to recover the rhythm of the meeting with a bright, brittle greeting, she did not bow or smile. She only spoke 5 words that hit the hall. Like a silent hammer, Earth will not return again. And then she turned, as did every human behind her, and they walked away without a single backward glance. The cameras stuttered, the recorders zoomed in, the stenographers whispered timestamps, and a few delegates laughed too loudly. Laughter that sounded like someone whistling in a graveyard, calling it human arrogance, human drama, human love for theater. But even as the laughter bounced weakly off the crystal walls, the human seats dimmed to black. The blue earth sigil on the table blinked twice and went dark. The translation nodes along the human desk powered down, and somewhere far below the chamber, docking clamps released with a deep iron sigh as the human shuttle detached, drifting away from the station like a leaf from a quiet tree. Voices rose then, questions first, insults second, and fear third, the order in which great halls always move, and yet the humans were already gone, their footsteps fading into the long corridor, their guards in perfect rhythm, their faces without triumph, not angry, not pleased, finished. Within minutes the station's press feeds pushed breaking banners to every screen in orbit. Humans exit emergency session. No comment, destination unknown. And still the council tried to laugh because laughter is easy when you feel safe. So a Cyrex senator with gold eyes leaned into his mic and joked about fragile Terran tempers. And a crawl general snapped that Earth would crawl back for docking rights within a week. And the High Speaker clapped his jeweled hands and called a short recess to allow our human friends to cool their impulses. But while he spoke the first reports arrived like quiet knives. The human embassy on Aurelius Prime shuttered its doors mid-morning, locked by a security lattice that accepted no council override. The human research office on Hesh Minor powered down, wiping coils and cold storing samples behind armored glass. The human aid convoys in 3 famine zones rerouted without explanation to silent holding points above uninhabited moons. The human arbitration teams who usually sat like clean needles in the council's knotted arguments simply failed to check in. Their rooms empty, their consoles dark. And the laughter in the hall thinned, then stopped, because more messages followed with the same shape, the same weight. Consulate closed, staff evacuated, codes revoked, no further statements. Until the feed boards around the chamber glittered. With the same pale phrase repeated across 100 systems like frost, diplomatic presence, withdrawn, someone asked for immediate contact with Earth Mission Control. But the Sol Relay returned a standardized envelope that contained nothing but a timestamp, a receipt, and a legal sentence that felt colder than space itself. All council access points suspended under Sovereign Retract Protocol. And the legalists in the upper rows looked at one another with a slow dawning horror because that was an old clause, dusty from disuse, built into the first treaties as a safety valve that no one thought would ever be pulled. The High Speaker tried to keep his voice smooth as he summoned Ambassador Lena back to the floor, but the page he sent returned alone from the corridor, wide-eyed and blinking, saying the humans never slowed, never argued, never spoke, they just walked to the core lifts and vanished downward. A shallow panic began to ripple then, the kind of panic that wears the mask of procedure, so committees formed in the hall like storm puddles, security, trade, mediation, emergency relief, and each committee asked for human inputs as it always had, and each request bounced off a closed channel, a sealed file, a darkened seal, and then a thin-voiced intern from the logistics gallery cried out that a human-built freight router over the Cascade had gone into autonomous safe mode, rerouting half the council's aid traffic into long, useless loops while denying administrative login to non-human signatures, not hostile, not cruel, simply locked, and a dozen worlds with thin inventories displayed red on the live map as delivery windows slipped. Someone whispered retaliation and an old admiral with silver scars said, very softly, "No, This is restraint. And when a young delegate demanded to know the difference, the admiral stared at the dark earth sigil and said, "Restraint is when they could hurt you and choose not to." And that sentence moved through the chamber like a draft. Elsewhere on the station, journalists ran, lights blinking on their rigs, chasing the vanishing tail of the human party. But the humans were leaving like they had entered, quietly, with all the doors already open, because they had requested nothing and owned everything they needed. In the docking atrium, the security glass caught their reflections. The ambassador a line of steady motion, the guards a calm shadow, and a maintenance drone, unaware of history, trilled a greeting as their shuttle's ramp side shut. The ship pulled away on minimal thrust, a polite departure rather than an escape, and when it slipped into the traffic lanes, 10 civilian captains yielded without prompt as if some old instinct told them to make space for a tide going out. Back in the hall, the High Speaker declared that the Council would dispatch an apology, or at least an invitation to dialogue, and a clerk dutifully sent the packet into the relays with all the antique dignity of brass seals and formal phrasing, but the packet returned unopened with a perfect, almost gentle error code. Recipient disengaged. A few delegates shouted then, not at Earth, but at one another, because fear looks for a face to wear, and the Crawl accused the Velka of pushing too hard on border patrol disputes. And the Velka hissed that the Crawl had mocked Terran customs during the last summit, and the Cyrex insisted humans were always a temporary convenience, and the room became a low storm of blame until Admiral Torvik, the oldest memory in the chamber, struck the rail with a blunt claw and said, "Listen," and they listened, and heard for the first time that the station itself had grown too quiet, as if a soft, constant hum had been subtracted. It was the hum of human schedulers, human translators, human quiet labor tucked into 1,000 small necessities the Council had forgotten were human at all. The emergency session resumed with sharper edges, motions drafted, votes demanded, but votes cannot reach a closed hand, and the hand of Earth was closed, fingers folded, not in a fist, just at rest, outside the windows. The Council's beacon spun its gentle light across the black, and some of the younger species took heart from that spinning. Surely symbols mattered, surely the architecture of unity would hold. But down on the trade decks ships began to miss their turn slots because the Terran anchoring algorithms had been pulled, and in the hospital ring a human-designed triage program politely logged out, leaving a dozen surgeons to recall by memory what the system had made effortless. And in the arbitration wing, an empty room with 3 grey chairs stood ready for a mediation team that would not come. News feeds began to ripple with ambient dread. A tiny mining moon reporting that its human inspector had left a note in perfect handwriting. "The seal on shaft 12 won't hold past winter. I hope you fix it anyway." And then boarded a ferry with a small duffel and no conversation. A frontier school without a teacher because the teacher was a woman from Patagonia who kept a garden of herbs in Zero G and who loved her students enough to leave before the shouting started. A pirate syndicate sensing the in-between space of power and dialing up raids in the faint gap that opens when grown-ups leave the room. The Council called these anecdotes and outliers, but anecdotes are how a mind feels the shape of a coming storm, and deep in the soul network the human relays blinked a calm pattern that translated to nothing at all in Council code but looked, to anyone with an eye for cadence, like breathing. That night, if night can be said to fall on a station that orbits a blue-white star, the observation dome emptied of tourists and filled with staff who pretended they were still working, but most of them simply watched a small triangle of light where the human shuttle had disappeared, and someone said, "They'll be back," and someone else said, "They always forgive." And the oldest technician in the dome shook her head and said, "They don't forgive. They move on," and the quiet after that sentence settled like ash. On the ground worlds the effect multiplied, first as delays, then as frictions, then as cracks. The agricultural grid on Tarsa 7 reported that the irrigation pattern humans had tuned season by season no longer matched the drought map, and yields fell by 5%, and 5% is only a number until it is a hunger. A border station discovered that the only person who could talk a hot-headed captain out of a hot-headed mistake had been a small, tired human with a thermos of tea and a habit of asking 2 questions in exactly the right order, and now there was no one to ask them. The Council tried to hire replacements, contract consultants, spin up subcommittees, but work is not just tasks, it is trust, and the trust had walked out of the room. On the 3rd day the High Speaker convened a broadcast to the galaxy, a long, sonorous speech that appealed to unity and tradition and the shared destiny of sentient life, and halfway through, the live audience metrics showed 40% drop-off. because speeches cannot mend what treaties did not see, and by the end the only part anyone quoted was a line the High Speaker did not mean to be quoted. We did not know how much they were holding, and that line, cut and replayed and set under footage of empty human offices, picked up a rhythm of its own. Meanwhile, Ambassador Lena Reed rode the quiet of a Terran courier through the dark, her hands folded, the guards around her in easy silence, and a junior aide finally asked, in a small voice, whether they had done the right thing, and Lena did not answer immediately, because leaders who answer immediately are often answering their own fear, not the question, and after a time she said, "We showed them the shape of their house without us. Now they will decide whether to build or burn," and she leaned her head back and closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to picture the chamber as it had been. Light-struck, proud, unlistening. By the week's end, Earth's embassies were not merely dark but gone. Leases terminated, crates shipped, plants watered one last time and left with a clipped label. "Take me, I am hardy." And some alien clerks cried at their desks because the little human kindnesses had been invisible until they weren't. The council met and met and met, and at each meeting a little more dust accumulated on the human nameplate. And on the 7th day the plate was removed, not out of anger, but because it hurt to look at it. And when a courier placed it in a storage locker, the lock recorded the soft sound of metal on metal, a sound like a small book closing. The galaxy began to tremble then in earnest, not from war, not yet, but from the thin, pervasive shiver that runs through a body when the spine steps away, and everyone pretended their hands were steady even as cups rattled gently on porcelain. That is how the walkout ended. Not with sirens, not with flames, but with the audible subtraction of a hum the council had thought was the station itself, and in that subtraction a new noise rose. The clatter of many, many small things failing at once, and somewhere in all that failure a single truth took shape in 100 mouths at once. No one knew what came next, because the people who usually knew had said 5 words and left, and suddenly the chamber where empires spoke discovered that silence, too, is a sentence, complete, final, and heavy enough to bend the orbit of a whole civilization. The Galactic Council met again 2 days later under the bright blue glare of the station's artificial dawn, but the room felt colder, wider, emptier. The lights still glowed, the banners of every species still hung above the long oval chamber, yet something invisible had been pulled from the air. The seats that once held the human delegation remained untouched, their surface dim and unpowered, a silent void among the color and chaos of the council. No one dared to sit there. The great table's holographic globe flickered around the human symbol, the blue and white Earth emblem now a ghostly shadow, glitching every few seconds as if refusing to die completely. Delegates whispered but avoided looking directly at the empty space. For centuries, humans had occupied that seat, not as conquerors, not as rulers, but as the voice that steadied storms. Whenever disputes had flared between empires, it was a human who mediated. Whenever colonies rebelled, it was a human envoy who calmed the fire. And now, in their absence, the cracks began to show. A merchant guild leader pounded his claws on the desk, shouting that trade lanes through human-controlled space were now locked. "Half our food routes run through their colonies," he roared. "They've cut us off." A pale, insectoid diplomat clicked her mandibles nervously. "No," she said, "they haven't cut us off. They've just left." The difference was small, but it made everyone shiver. Leaving meant choice. Leaving meant control. The High Speaker called for order, his jeweled robe swaying as he rose, but even his voice lacked power. He demanded reports. They came in fragments, each worse than the last. The Terran embassy on Dravos, sealed. The human trade envoy to the Crawl Empire, gone. The entire Terran communication grid, offline to non-human access. The galaxy's arteries were closing, and the Council didn't know how to stop the bleeding. "It's only temporary," muttered a silver-scaled minister, forcing a smile. "They'll return once they realize how much they need us." But deep down, no one believed that. In orbit above the core worlds, cargo haulers waited for clearance that never came. Human-controlled customs stations answered no calls. Starports that once pulsed with Terran traffic now drifted in silence, their beacons blinking lazily into the void. It was as if a vast heart had stopped beating, and the galaxy hadn't yet realized it was suffocating. On the 3rd day, the first real consequence appeared. A famine ship from the Arix cluster broke apart at the edge of a wormhole, unable to navigate the route once stabilized by human jump engineers. Thousands died before the news reached the Council. When it did, the chamber erupted. "They abandoned us," one delegate screamed. "They killed our people by walking away." Another slammed a fist against the table. "They should be punished." But punished how? Humanity had already withdrawn beyond the Council's reach. They no longer needed permission, nor approval, nor anyone else. For the first time in living memory, the Council was truly alone. The High Speaker demanded that an envoy be sent to Earth to reopen communications, but every volunteer fell silent when asked to go. The last report from the Sol system described massive human fleets assembling at Mars orbit. Silent, dark, their transponders cold. "It's a bluff," whispered one nervous aide. "They're trying to frighten us." Admiral Torvak, the oldest and wisest among them, shook his head. "No. Humans do not bluff. When they are silent, they are done talking." The room fell still again, and in that silence, the truth began to unfold. Humanity had not just left the Council. They had taken something far more vital with them: balance. The Council's archives, once maintained by Terran analysts, now lagged by hours. The Interstellar translation systems, designed by human linguists, stuttered and misinterpreted key phrases, turning simple debates into insults. Even the atmosphere regulators in the chamber, built by Earth's engineers decades ago, flickered uneasily, making the air feel thinner. The Council was unraveling, one unnoticed thread at a time. Outside, through the wide crystal windows, a fleet of merchant ships drifted in holding pattern, their pilots unsure who now controlled the space lanes. The universe itself seemed to hold its breath. Across hundreds of systems, rumors spread like wildfire. Some said the humans had gone into hiding to build a secret empire. Others said they were preparing for war. A few whispered that Earth had gone silent because it was preparing something the galaxy could never imagine. The High Speaker dismissed it all as nonsense, but his hands trembled as he turned off the hologram feed. Late that night, when the chamber emptied and the lights dimmed, Admiral Torvak remained behind. He walked slowly to the human table, his claws clicking on the polished floor. He reached out and touched the cold metal plate engraved with one word: Earth. For a long time, he stared at it, remembering every negotiation, every battle they had prevented, every time humans had stepped in not for power, but for peace. "We thought they needed us," he whispered. "But it was we who needed them." He left the chamber quietly. As the doors closed behind him, the lights over the human seats flickered once more, then went dark for good. And though no one admitted it, that night marked the beginning of the Council's collapse. Because the galaxy didn't realize it yet, but it had already lost its center. The third week after humanity's departure began with the sound of breaking glass inside the Council chamber, not from violence, but from pressure. Pressure building in every direction as centuries of false peace began to crack. The galaxy had always believed it was stable because of rules, treaties, and the Council's grand speeches. But now everyone could see that it had only been stable because of the humans. Without them, the balance shattered faster than anyone imagined. It started small. 2 border colonies, Velka and Kral, filed simultaneous claims over a mining world once monitored by human peacekeepers. The Council tried to intervene, but their arbitration systems were offline, still locked behind Earth's encryption protocols. "We'll restore access soon," promised the High Speaker, but even he could hear the panic in his own voice. Within days, ships from both empires descended on the disputed world. What was meant to be a diplomatic inspection turned into a full-blown firefight. News of the first interstellar battle in 50 years spread across the stars like wildfire. The Council called an emergency meeting, but the chamber that once glowed with confidence now looked like a funeral hall. Delegates shouted across the floor, their translator systems glitching mid-sentence. "We told you the humans were manipulating us," one Kral general bellowed, pounding his scaled fist on the table. "They left to make us weak." A Velka senator hissed back, her crest flaring bright orange. "Weak? They left because you insulted them. You called them savages in front of the Council. And now who saves us from savages?" another delegate shouted. The chamber erupted into noise, overlapping arguments turning into chaos. The High Speaker slammed his hand on the podium. Order! We must not let this spiral further. But no one listened. Even the translators, once flawless, began distorting words. When one delegate said calm, the system translated it as submit. When another said discussion, it came through as accusation. The machines that once bridged species now deepened the divide. And somewhere in the corner, the human emblem still flickered faintly, like a ghost watching the empire it once steadied crumble. Admiral Torvak, sitting quietly near the back, watched everything in silence. His four-fingered hands rested on the table, claws dull with age. "You're all children," he muttered softly. "You never understood them." No one heard him. Outside the chamber, chaos spread to the stars. Human-built trade stations closed their doors, their automated systems refusing alien command codes. Cargo fleets stalled in deep space, unable to dock. Food convoys drifted, their navigation AI waiting for human authorization that would never come. The galaxy's arteries, commerce, transport, communication, began to clog. And when great systems clog, they rot from the inside. On the 10th day, the first planet declared independence from the Council. Arios Prime, a small agricultural world, transmitted a single message across every frequency. The humans kept us fed. The Council keeps us waiting. We choose survival. Others soon followed. Dozens of colonies, once loyal to the Council's flag, began declaring themselves neutral or self-governed. The chamber burned with fury. "This is rebellion," the High Speaker shouted. "We must restore unity." But unity had left with Earth's ambassadors. Outside the great window, the stars that once shimmered like allies now looked like distant fires. In the shadows of those fires, fleets began to move. Armies that had slept for decades awoke. The Crawl Empire mobilized along the outer rim, their generals claiming it was for defense, though no one believed them. The Velka Alliance formed a blockade around 3 systems rich in Terran-built technology. The Council demanded explanations, but the transmissions came back delayed, cold, and dismissive. The age of diplomacy was dying, and no one could stop it. On the colony world of Hesh, riots broke out as factories built by human engineers failed under alien management. The maintenance systems refused to obey local overrides, programmed only to respond to human access keys. When the systems shut down, the temperature in the main power core spiked, melting through the factory's lower decks. Thousands fled, shouting that Earth's ghost had come to punish them. The Council sent aid, but their ships arrived late, confused by out-of-date navigation codes that only human pilots had ever mastered. One by one, the foundations of the Galactic Order began to crumble. In the Council chamber, the High Speaker gathered what remained of the senior delegates. His voice trembled as he said, "We must send an envoy to Earth. We cannot survive like this." But no one volunteered. No one wanted to face the silence of Sol. Finally, Admiral Torvak stood, his voice low and firm. "You don't send envoys to a closed door," he said. "You wait until the one behind it chooses to open it again." The younger delegates stared at him in disbelief. "So we just do nothing?" one shouted. Torvak's gaze turned toward the empty human seats. "You think you can do anything without them?" he asked. The words struck the room like thunder, but no one replied. Across the galaxy, news anchors broadcast images of collapsing trade lanes, failing colonies, and ghost ships floating through human-built relays that no longer answered. The commentators tried to stay neutral, but their voices cracked when they spoke the same phrase again and again: "The fracture has begun." And yet, somewhere far beyond the Council's reach, deep within the quiet black between stars, human ships moved unseen. Vast carriers with dark hulls glided past sensor nets, their lights off, their insignias hidden. Inside those ships, command decks pulsed with life. Officers monitored transmissions, watching the chaos unfold with calm, analytical eyes. "Do we intervene?" asked one lieutenant. The commander shook his head. "Not yet," he said. "Let them see what unity costs when it's taken for granted." The lieutenant looked uneasy. And when they beg for help? The commander's gaze turned toward a hologram of the galaxy, fractured into 100 blinking red systems. Then, he said, we decide if they've learned. Back in the council chamber, the power flickered, dimming the lights for a brief moment, and when they came back, the Earth emblem on the table was gone, deleted from the system entirely. It was as if the galaxy itself had finally accepted the truth. The humans weren't coming back. Not yet. And the stars had never felt so cold. Months passed, but time didn't heal the galaxy, it hollowed it out. The once busy trade lanes now echoed with silence as thousands of ships floated aimlessly, waiting for orders that would never come. Human-built infrastructure, spanning light years, connecting species, and holding empires together, had begun to wither without its creators. The great orbital docks over the crawl worlds, designed by Terran engineers, remained empty, their cranes frozen mid-lift. The Velka navigation networks blinked offline one by one. The Council tried to issue repair teams, but every system demanded an authorization code only humans possessed. It wasn't sabotage, it was design. The galaxy had been built on the backbone of Terran order, and now that backbone was gone. The High Speaker addressed the Council once more, but even his voice carried no weight. We must maintain faith, he said. We will restore what has been lost. Yet everyone in that chamber knew he was lying, to them and to himself. Rumors began to spread faster than light. In the outer colonies, miners swore they saw human fleets passing silently through the void, black ships with no transponders, moving in formation before disappearing into the dark. Refugees on dying worlds told stories of mysterious vessels that arrived out of nowhere, dropped supplies, repaired communications, and vanished before dawn. Some called them ghosts. Others called them guardians. The Council called them lies. Humans are gone, one delegate shouted during a heated session. They would not abandon us only to play savior in shadows. Admiral Torvak, who sat quietly through every argument, finally spoke. Maybe they didn't abandon us, he said softly. Maybe they're reminding us. The chamber fell silent, but his words spread like fire through the stars. Every world had its own version of the myth, the Echo Fleet, the Watchers, the Silent Wings. Even the pirates whispered the name with unease. The galaxy had become a place of ghosts, haunted not by the dead, but by those who had simply walked away. The High Speaker ordered a full investigation into these sightings, but none of the Council's intelligence ships found evidence. What they did find was worse. Human colonies fortified with planetary shields of unknown design. Entire sectors closed off behind walls of static, unresponsive to all hails. A transmission from a scout vessel captured the sound of a soft tone before its feed cut out. 3 notes, repeating, calm, steady, almost musical. The analysts called it a signal. The older officers recognized it as a warning. Without human guidance, the smaller empires began to panic. The Crawl, hungry for expansion, declared martial law across the outer rim, seizing neutral planets for protection. The Velka retaliated by blockading the Crawl supply routes. Skirmishes erupted daily, and no one could stop them. The council chambers devolved into shouting matches, with ambassadors accusing each other of betrayal. You wanted humans gone, screamed one. Now live with the world you asked for. But the shouting meant nothing. The fractures had become fault lines, and the galaxy trembled as they deepened. Meanwhile, deep in Terran space, humanity watched. On Earth, the night sky glowed with the reflection of orbital shipyards, tens of thousands of vessels under construction. The Sol system, once open and welcoming, was now closed, sealed under the human defense grid. Above the moon, in a fortress of glass and steel, Admiral Lena Reed stood before the Council of Nations, her expression unreadable. The Council is tearing itself apart, one aide reported. Their fleets are fighting each other. They're begging for communication. And have we answered? She asked. No, he said. As ordered. Reed nodded slowly. Good. Let them feel the quiet. Her voice was calm, but her eyes held something deeper, sadness. They thought our diplomacy was weakness, she said. They mistook patience for submission. Let them learn the cost of peace they took for granted. Back on the Galactic Council station, the impact of that silence grew unbearable. Without human trade stabilizers, the economic grids collapsed. Food shortages swept across systems that had never known hunger. Disease followed in the shadows. Entire planets began begging for aid from human colonies that no longer answered. The irony was cruel. For centuries, the galaxy had called humans unpredictable, emotional, reckless, and now, they begged for their predictability, their logic, their compassion. The High Speaker sent a final plea to Earth, his voice trembling. "We were wrong," he said into the broadcast, his eyes glistening. "You were the glue that held the stars together. Without you, we are dust in the wind. Return to us." The message traveled through relay after relay, bouncing through abandoned channels until it reached Sol's border. There it stopped. No reply came. Yet hours later, across dozens of systems, power grids flickered back online. Agricultural machines restarted. Navigation maps updated. It wasn't everywhere, just enough to stop collapse. The aliens cheered, thinking humanity had returned. But Admiral Reed, watching from orbit, simply whispered, "We only fixed what they can't afford to lose." Back in the chamber, the delegates clung to hope, pretending the repair meant forgiveness. But the wise ones, those who had studied humanity closely, knew the truth. This wasn't a return. This was a warning. Humanity was showing them that mercy was not absence. It was control. The galaxy was trembling not because humans were gone, but because they might still be watching. And that thought alone was enough to keep every empire awake at night, staring at the stars, wondering if the silence in the dark was just silence, or the calm before something far greater that it began without warning, like a heartbeat stopping mid-pulse. One moment, the Galactic Council's core world shimmered under its twin suns. The next, the sky went dark. Satellites blinked offline, communication relays failed, and across the city of glass and metal, every light died in unison. The great towers that once held the proud banners of the galaxy's empires now stood as black silhouettes against a burning horizon. Alarms screamed through the capital, echoing through every corridor of the council station. The High Speaker stumbled from his quarters, robes half clutched around him, shouting for his aides, but the intercom was dead. In orbit, fleets reported the same: no sensors, no navigation, no signals. "It's an attack," cried Admiral Vrax, his 4 golden eyes wide with panic. But no ships appeared on radar. No enemies emerged from hyperspace. It was as if the galaxy itself had vanished. The only light left came from the faint blue glow of emergency beacons and the terrified eyes of those who realized that nothing mechanical, nothing digital, nothing designed by human hands would answer their commands. Panic spread through the city like fire. Starport control towers collapsed into chaos as ships drifted, blind, colliding with each other in orbit. On the surface, civilians screamed as the skies filled with the sound of engines falling silent mid-air. The council guards fired flares into the dark, their weapons shaking in their hands. "Who did this?" one shouted. "Krull? Velka?" But the truth was far more terrifying. In the Grand Chamber, the High Speaker stood trembling before the holographic globe of the galaxy. It flickered on for a brief moment, every world connected by faint light, and then, one by one, those lights went out. Hundreds of dots vanished until only a handful remained glowing faintly red. The system AI tried to reboot, but before it could finish, the hologram twisted, flickering into static. And then, across every screen in every system, across the void of space, across the abandoned human colonies, the message appeared. 3 lines of white text, silent but thunderous. "This is the world you built without us." The words burned themselves into the minds of all who saw them. There was no logo, no sound, no signature, only a faint pulse at the end of the message, like a heartbeat, slow and deliberate. The pulse repeated 3 times, then stopped. The galaxy froze. Every leader, every soldier, every ambassador stared at those words and felt their blood turn to ice. The High Speaker's voice broke the silence first. Get me anyone," he shouted, slamming the control console. "Find the origin of that transmission. But the tech crews couldn't. The signal hadn't come from one place, it had come from everywhere. It echoed from human-built satellites, old relay stations, and ancient communication hubs once thought abandoned. It was as if the message had been waiting for this moment, buried deep in the systems that no one ever understood, set to awaken when chaos reached its peak. They planned this, whispered Admiral Torvak, his voice shaking. They saw this coming before they even left. Outside, the chaos grew worse. Fleets collided in orbit, their captains shouting over broken radios. Colonies broadcast desperate distress calls that overlapped until they became a single chorus of panic. We're blind. Systems down. Food processing offline. Weapons unresponsive. The galaxy's great powers, once so proud and confident, now sounded like frightened children calling for help in the dark. In the council chamber, the air grew heavy. Someone shouted that humans had declared war. Another screamed that it was punishment for centuries of arrogance. But Torvak only closed his eyes. No, he said. This is not war. This is truth. He pointed toward the message still glowing above the table. They are showing us what we are without them. The chamber went silent again, broken only by the crackle of dying lights. Somewhere deep beneath the city, a reactor failed, sending tremors through the ground. Dust fell from the ceiling. The delegates panicked again, screaming as the structure shuddered. The high speaker gripped the railing. We must send a peace message, he shouted. We must beg them to return. But even that command was useless. Every relay to Earth had gone dark years ago, and now not even a whisper could pass through. Then, for a brief moment, power flickered. The hologram pulsed, and the message changed. This time, it wasn't words. It was a sound. A low hum that grew deeper until it became a voice. Not human, not machine, but something between. You wanted freedom from us, the voice said calmly, its tone devoid of emotion. Now you have it. You wanted power without guidance. Now you see what that means. The delegates fell to their knees. The voice paused, then whispered the final sentence that would haunt the galaxy forever. We built your peace. You built your chaos. And then it was gone. The power returned, lights flickered back on, and everything resumed as if nothing had happened. But the silence that followed was worse than the darkness. No one spoke. No one dared. The galaxy had just learned a lesson carved not in war, but in absence. That night would be remembered for centuries as the night of panic, the night every world realized that the humans had not just left. They had been watching, waiting, and reminding everyone exactly what it meant to exist without them. The morning after the message, the Galactic Council was no longer a council, it was a battlefield. The once shining chamber that had stood as a symbol of unity for centuries now echoed with screams, arguments, and betrayal. Delegates from 100 species shouted over one another, their translator systems glitching and distorting their words into anger. The high speaker, pale and trembling, stood at the center of the chaos, banging the ceremonial staff on the floor. Order, he cried, but no one listened. The council guards, overwhelmed, could only watch as ambassadors stormed out or hurled accusations across the floor. This is your fault, roared the Crawl representative, his massive frame towering above the others. You trusted the humans too much. A Velka general hissed back, no, you insulted them until they left. You brought this upon us. The shouting turned to violence as tables overturned and holograms shattered. Reports poured in from across the galaxy, entire systems going dark, fleets deserting, colonies declaring independence. The council is finished, screamed a delegate as he ripped the insignia from his uniform and threw it to the ground. We built our empire on their technology, and now that they've taken it back, we have nothing. The high speaker's voice cracked as he begged for calm, but even his guards had abandoned their posts. The old man turned to Admiral Torvak, his last ally. What do we do? He whispered, desperation in his eyes. Torvak looked at him for a long moment, then shook his head. There is nothing to do, he said quietly. The council is falling because it was never built to stand on its own. Outside, chaos unfolded on a scale the galaxy had never seen. The Crawl fleet, once loyal to the council, turned its guns on the Velka armada. The Velka responded with orbital strikes that lit up the night sky like fire. On distant worlds, riots erupted as food supplies dwindled and power grids failed. Entire cities went dark while desperate broadcasts screamed for aid. "Where are the humans?" voices begged across open channels. "They have to come back. They can fix this." But no reply ever came. In the capital city, buildings crumbled as protests became uprisings. The great marble statues of peace, the ones humans helped carve generations ago, were pulled down and shattered in the streets. Fires rose higher than the towers once built by Terran architects. The galaxy's proud civilizations, stripped of their stabilizers, now turned on one another like starving animals. The Council's final session took place under emergency power. Only a few delegates remained, their faces hollow and eyes red from exhaustion. The High Speaker addressed them one last time. "We were given guidance, and we spat on it," he said hoarsely. "We mistook mercy for weakness. We called wisdom arrogance. And now," he gestured toward the cracked ceiling above them, where faint beams of light filtered through smoke. "Now we reap what we planted." No one responded. Most of them had already sent messages to their home worlds, declaring withdrawal from the Council. Within hours, the remaining nations announced their independence, breaking treaties that had held for centuries. The chamber that once echoed with unity now echoed with silence. Torvak remained seated, his expression unreadable. He watched the High Speaker remove his medallion of office and lay it on the table before walking away without another word. The sound of his footsteps faded until there was nothing left but the hum of dying lights. Torvak stood and walked to the center of the empty room, staring at the faint outline where the Earth emblem had once glowed on the floor. "It's over," he said softly. "They warned us. We didn't listen." He looked up toward the ceiling, toward the stars that had once seemed so full of promise. "And now the galaxy will learn what peace really costs." Outside the chamber, the station trembled as power failures spread through its core. Emergency beacons flashed red across the skyline, signaling evacuation. Ships fled in every direction, abandoning the capital like rats escaping a sinking ship. The Galactic Council, once the greatest governing body in history, was gone. Not with an explosion, not with an invasion, but with a silence so complete it swallowed the stars. In the following weeks, entire sectors closed off, ruled by warlords and fragmented governments. The old alliances that had held for generations were nothing more than ghosts. The Great Council world itself became a ruin, a drifting shell of broken glass and twisted steel, a monument to arrogance. And yet, even in that ruin, a strange feeling lingered, something the survivors couldn't name. Whenever they looked up at the empty sky, they felt it, a quiet, watching presence. Somewhere out there, beyond the dead satellites and frozen relays, humanity still watched. Not with hatred, but with judgment. They had withdrawn their light, and in doing so, reminded the galaxy that they had been its sun. And without them, there was only darkness. It happened weeks after the Council's fall, when the galaxy was still bleeding from its own wounds. Entire fleets drifted in the dark, their captains dead or deserted, their systems half-functional. Planets that once glowed like jewels in the night now flickered faintly, surviving only on backup generators. No one trusted anyone anymore. Empires that had called each other ally now exchanged gunfire across the stars. Then, without warning, a signal appeared. It came not from a planet, not from a fleet, but from deep within the void, coordinates that no navigation map recognized. The message was short, only a set of numbers and a symbol. The symbol was unmistakable, Earth's seal. At first, most dismissed it as a trick, a ghost transmission left over from the chaos. But then the same signal repeated, across every system still capable of receiving communication. Each repetition grew stronger, sharper, undeniable. "It's them," whispered a technician aboard a crawl destroyer, her claws trembling as she stared at the glowing blue emblem. "It's the humans." The signal carried instructions, one location, one time, one message. "All who seek balance, come." For the first time in months, fleets across the galaxy stopped firing. The empires hesitated. The High Speaker's replacement, a frightened young Velka named Sarin, called an emergency summit. "We cannot ignore this," she said. "If it's real, this may be our only chance." Even Admiral Torvak, now an old, weary man, straightened at the sound of those words. "They wouldn't send a signal unless they wanted to be found," he said. "And if they want to be found, it means they're ready." Every major power prepared its ships. Massive fleets, stripped of pride and swollen with desperation, aligned toward the unknown coordinates. And when they arrived, they found not a planet, not a station, but a single platform, a floating construct of steel and light suspended above a blue and green world. Earth, the home they had mocked, the world they had once called primitive, now stood below them, its surface glittering with endless cities and defense grids that glowed like constellations. Even through the darkness of space, they could feel its presence. There was no mistaking it. The humans were not just alive. They were stronger than ever. As the fleets approached, their systems shut down automatically, one by one, leaving every ship dead in orbit. Engines stopped, shields fell, weapons powered down. Not from attack, but from command. Human command. The visitors could only watch as a single vessel rose from Earth's surface, gliding silently toward the platform. It was sleek, black, and massive, with markings none could decipher. When it stopped, its airlock opened, and one human stepped out. He was tall, dressed in a simple dark uniform with no medals, no rank insignia, only a silver band across his chest. He walked across the platform with slow, calm steps. "Who is he?" someone whispered through the comms. The answer came from Torvak, who leaned forward in his chair, recognizing the face from centuries of history. "Admiral Reed," he said, "the last ambassador of Earth." The entire galaxy watched in silence as Reed reached the center of the platform. He didn't need a microphone. His voice carried across the open transmission channels, reaching every ship, every species, every world. "You wanted a galaxy without humans," he began softly. "Now you've seen what that looks like." His words were calm, but they cut deeper than any weapon. "You called our diplomacy arrogance. You called our peace manipulation. You mocked our patience and questioned our restraint. So we gave you what you asked for, a galaxy without us." He paused, his eyes sweeping across the hundreds of ships hovering lifeless in orbit. "And what did you build in our absence? War, hunger, division." No one dared to reply. "We did not abandon you," Reed continued. "We withdrew so you could see what peace costs to maintain. You thought it was words. But peace is built on strength, sacrifice, and vigilance. You forgot that." His voice hardened slightly. "Humanity does not rule this galaxy. We never wanted to. But we will never again bleed to hold it together for those who don't value it." The alien leaders stared, ashamed and silent. The Velka envoy tried to speak, but no sound came from his throat. We were wrong," he finally managed to say, trembling. "We see that now." Reed nodded slowly. "I know you do. And that's why you're still alive." For a long moment, no one breathed. "From this day," Reed said, his tone firm and commanding, "Earth will not stand as your counsel, your shield, or your servant. We will stand as your mirror. What you give, we will return. Peace for peace. War for war." His eyes burned with quiet fire as he looked up at the stars. "And should any forget what that means, look at what happened when we left." Then, without another word, he turned and walked back toward his ship. The engines ignited, glowing white against the black sky. As the human vessel descended, every alien ship regained power. Engines roared back to life, controls returned, but none dared to move. They simply drifted, stunned, watching Earth below, a world that no longer needed their approval. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy understood something simple and absolute. Humanity had not returned to rule. They had returned to remind. And that reminder would echo through the stars for generations, a silent warning carved into every memory. Never take their silence for surrender. Long after the meeting above Earth, the galaxy was never the same again. The fleets that had gathered in fear drifted quietly back to their home worlds, their captains silent, their hearts heavy with something none of them had felt in generations: respect. No one dared to speak during the journey home, not after hearing Admiral Reed's words. The stars outside seemed different now, colder, sharper, as if they too were watching and remembering. On every world, from the glowing towers of Velka Prime to the dust plains of Crawler 9, people whispered of the day humanity returned. They didn't call it a threat. They called it a reckoning. In the weeks that followed, the galaxy began to rebuild, not from pride, but from humility. The broken trade lanes reopened, this time without human supervision but under human design. Their systems reactivated only after Earth's approval codes pulsed through the networks. The power grid stabilized, and famine ended as Earth quietly sent supplies through unmarked convoys that never asked for credit or thanks. Every leader knew what that meant. Humanity was restoring the galaxy not for the Council, not for politics, but for balance. Yet no one mistook it for forgiveness. Every signal, every transmission from Earth came with the same silent message: remember. The Crawl Empire dissolved its war fleets, dismantling half its armada after an anonymous human message appeared in their system's mainframe. The next war will not last a day. The Velka scientists received encrypted blueprints for new agricultural networks signed only with the Terran symbol, followed by one sentence: feed them before you fight them. Even the pirates and smugglers who once thrived in chaos began to vanish, many claiming they had seen black ships appear out of nowhere, locking weapons but never firing, just watching, until the criminals surrendered out of sheer fear. The galaxy slowly returned to peace, but it was a different peace now, a quiet one built on memory instead of arrogance. The new Galactic Charter was written not in gold halls or proud speeches, but in silence. It was signed on a neutral platform orbiting an unmarked moon, the same platform where Admiral Reed had spoken. No applause, no cameras, no celebration. Just trembling hands and bowed heads. When the final delegate placed their mark on the treaty, they looked up toward the stars and said what everyone else was thinking: let's not make them walk away again. Back on Earth, life went on as it always had. The cities glowed brighter than ever, the skies clear, the oceans calm. Humanity didn't celebrate their return or boast of their power. They simply continued their work, building, watching, preparing. In a massive command hall deep beneath the surface, Admiral Reed stood before a panoramic display showing the galaxy's restored network. His aide approached, handing him a report. The Council worlds are stable again, sir. Trade has resumed, and the new charter was signed without conflict. Reed nodded slowly, his reflection hard and distant in the glass. Good, he said softly. Let them rebuild. Let them remember. The aide hesitated. Sir, do you think they truly understand what we meant? Reed smiled faintly, his eyes still on the stars. They understand enough. Fear teaches faster than words. For a long moment, the two stood in silence, watching the holographic image of the galaxy rotate slowly before them. Then Reed turned and walked toward the observation deck, his boots echoing across the metal floor. Outside, the human fleet orbited Earth like a crown of light, vast ships of black steel, silent and unmoving, guardians of a peace that no longer needed to be spoken. We didn't abandon them, Reed said quietly. We reminded them what happens when they forget who held the line. He looked down at Earth, glowing blue and alive beneath him. We are not their rulers, he continued. We are their consequence. And with that, he turned away, leaving only the sound of distant engines humming softly in the dark. Across the stars, on worlds far and near, the story of humanity's silence became legend. In schools, alien children learned of the time the Council mocked Earth and how the galaxy nearly burned. In temples, priests recited the words Admiral Reed spoke that day. And in the endless void of space, every ship that passed through a Terran relay heard a faint pulse, a heartbeat, soft and steady, like the echo of a warning carried through time. Generations would pass, but that sound would never fade. It was humanity's final message to the galaxy, a lesson carved not in war, but in memory. Never mistake Earth's silence for absence. Never mistake its mercy for weakness. Because the day humanity walks away, the stars themselves will tremble.